record. Cool. All right. Welcome, everyone. It's the start of 2018, a whole new year. And this is the first in our series, our Fuse training series. And this is week one. It's going to be paperwork. I'm going to talk about the full purchase and sale agreement, all the addendums. I think I'm saying that right. Addendums, addendae. Anyway, so all the different forms, at least the major forms that go along with this. Those of you in Washington know that there's 200 forms out there. I mean, there's stuff that applies to Snohomish County septic rules and Island County easement issues. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff out there. So we're going to avoid all that. We're going to get into just kind of the meat and potatoes of what 95% of every transaction includes. I'm going to try to keep it casual, which means I drink a lot of water and I drink tea. So I got them both here. Go ahead and ask questions as we go along. I'm going to make sure that everyone's muted and then ask questions in the chat room. Alex is going to monitor that, but sometimes I'll stop and I'll check out the chat room down here in the little corner. And if I see a question, I'll go back and address that question. So we want to keep it casual. It's just us. We're just family. So no worries there. So I'm going to mute all. Hopefully you guys can hear me. All right. Clear my throat. It's really dry here in Spokane. I shut the shades behind me, but I know Oregon, Idaho, and Washington is warmer than it normally is this time of year, but it's also still really dry. So I do cough a lot and I itch my nose a lot and stuff like that. So hopefully that's not too irritating to you guys. It is to me, but I can't control it. Okay, so paperwork. Components of a purchase and sale agreement. What does this entail? And I know we've got veterans out there. People have been doing this for decades. We've got other people who have been doing it for 2 days. And so that is, that's kind of what this is all about, is either a refresher or for some of the newer people to get in on this and kind of learn the basics. I remember when I did my first purchase and sale agreement in, beginning of 1990s, somewhere in there, it was pretty confusing. And there was great panic. It was like, oh my gosh, I've got to do a purchase and sale agreement. What do I do? And so we want to make sure that you guys don't feel that panic. So we're here for you. I'm here for you. The whole team is here for you. But at the same time, make sure you guys do your diligence. I don't know if you say do your due diligence or due diligence, but make sure you read the paperwork. Every state has got different paperwork, and so there's different laws, different regulations, different pieces of paper that you have to include in this stuff. Certainly there's federal forms where we've got a seller disclosures included in every state in the union. There are lead-based paint forms, so anything older than 1978, you have to include that lead-based paint form. There's goofy state stuff, like here in Washington, including an Exhibit A. There's no other state that includes an Exhibit A, and that's just the description of the property. So state-specific forms are, like I say, goofy. But what can we do? States have their laws, and we just have to abide by them. The full purchase and sale. Let's take a look at one of the purchase and sale agreements here in Washington, since the majority of you are in Washington. Now, I've got Spokane MLS, I've got Boise MLS, I've got the Northwest MLS, and we've got transaction forms. I think transaction desk here in Idaho forms. But Spokane, we're going to go into, actually, you know what, Northwest MLS is easier. Express forms is easier way to get into them. Got all these forms here. And here we go, residential purchase and sale agreement. So the residential purchase and sale agreement is your basic main form. And like any contract, it's got dates on it. The key to any contract is to have a start date and an end date, and then the information in the middle. So those are the basic components of any contract. So obviously the date today, here we've got an MLS number, offer expiration date. Now with an offer expiration, you want to be careful about that. I realize that we've got some hot markets out there, whether it's Portland or Seattle, even the Tri-Cities is hot. Boise's hot. Idaho, North Idaho and Spokane are a little less hot. I mean, things are moving at a nice clip, but there's no panic there. So when you do an offer expiration date, really gauge the need to expedite offers, but also give people time to review those offers. For example, if you have, if you're in Seattle and you know there's 10 offers that are coming in, and you're like, offer expiration date today. Well, they've got today. The sellers might be traveling. The sellers might be wanting to review all their offers. So the key to that is just reach out to the listing agent and say, hey, listing agent, what are you guys thinking? Are you guys reviewing offers today, tomorrow? And they might say, oh, tomorrow at 5, we're going to review offers. Okay, well, I'll make my offer expiration tomorrow, 9 p.m. Typically 2 days is a good time to review an offer, but again, I get it. If you're in a hot market, if you're going to do it same day, just make sure you are communicating with the listing agent. Obviously, buyer and seller are pretty simple. Now with the seller, you're gonna do two things here. I mean, with the buyer, you're gonna want to make sure that is the name they want on title, and try to get all the names to kind of come together and match. So seller as well. If the seller is on title, it says Joseph T. Kelly, and here it says Joe Kelly. Well, those are different. And there could be some confusion there. Most people say, okay, an AKA form or some sort of alias form the title can draw up. That's fine, but why muddy the waters? So match what is on title, okay? Here's that Exhibit A. Again, this is a Washington form, so it says Exhibit A here, but typically just the tax parcel and the legal description. Legal description, sometimes you can just write in on an addendum, or in different states it has different areas for the legal description. And you can find that at the county assessor's website. So almost every county assessor, other than the ones that are way up in the backwoods and have no budget, are online and they're electronic. So boom, 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 you just get online, you look up a parcel, you see the legal description, fantastic, cut and paste. Let's see. Included items on this one. Actually, let me make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. So let me go back to dates. Oh, let's get into signatures. Let me stick by my new agenda. So when we're doing this, we want to make sure that signatures are complete. And again, kind of a segue into if you've got a name that says Joseph T. Kelly, try to get the signature to say Joseph T. Kelly. Try to get everything to match. And again, there's a lot of reasons for that. You've got different mortgage companies and underwriters that are like, if that's confusing, then you have to go back out and get that AKA form. You don't want to do that. You want everything to match. So signatures are really important, and also initials. So we go down here and it says seller, buyer, seller initials. More initials here. I mean, you want to just initial everything. In this day and age where everyone is so hypersensitive and we're so litigious, you want to make sure you're initialing everything, including that Exhibit A. Any sort of extra documents that are brought in, make sure that they're initialed so that they're acknowledged, so that if there's ever a mess, and that's what all this is about. Ultimately, if it goes to court, if it's a mess, we want to make sure that we've got our documentation in place. So signatures are very important. Date it that day and make sure the dates all match. Make sure the signatures and initials all match, and make sure it's complete. I know that it can get really sloppy out there sometimes, but we don't want sloppy paperwork. We love good paperwork. Okay, so back on track. Purchase price. Purchase price is obviously very well, it's simple and it's complex at the same time. I mean, the purchase price is like, okay, you're offering $200,000. I want to buy it for $200,000. I'm going to write in $200,000. That's fine, but you have to understand the nuances of the market. And again, those of you in real hot markets, $200,000 for a $200,000 house isn't going to be enough. I mean, you know that. So you have to gauge kind of what you're willing to offer, but also what it's going to appraise at. Okay, so yeah, you could put in here $1 million. Well, guess what? The appraiser's coming back at 205, so it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to finance $1 million, even though you're willing to pay that, unless you have cash and you're an idiot. Then you can pay the $1 million. But most people don't. So you want to make sure you're balancing it, and then you balance that with a couple other components, whether it's an escalation clause, which we'll get into. I do want to cover a little bit because of the hot market we're going to experience this year, and also the appraisal less than purchase price. Okay. But typically, that's where you go and do your research. Before you do a purchase price, what I do is I do my research. I've got the same information. You guys have the same information that appraisers have. So go into the MLS, pull your comps, your comparables, and you want to go back 6 months, and you want to go out 1 mile radius. Okay, so every map that I've seen that I'm a part of has a radius search. Go out a mile if it's in an urban area. If it's in a rural area, you can go out a few miles, okay? But 6 months is as far back as you go. And then you want to make sure the comps are they're truly comparable. Bathrooms are a really key one. So if your subject property is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, you can get comps that are 4-bedroom, 2-bath, but you're not going to get 4-bedroom, 3-bath. That's outside of the realm. You want to keep the range of construction within about a decade. So if it was built in 1953, you could probably go back to 1955 to 1965, something like that. And then I compare taxes. So I look at the taxes on that property and say, okay, the taxes are $3,300. My comps, they're at $2,000. Whoa, time out. That's not a good comp if the tax assessed value is too low. Okay, so you want to get your comps. Then when I get my comps, I'm like, okay, you know what? All these comps are supporting 200. So then I can go to the buyer and say, okay, the purchase prices, they're asking 200. My comps support 200. Do you want to offer 200? Let's offer 200. Well, it's pretty competitive. It's a competitive market. Do you want to offer more than that? Well, no, but let's do 200 with an escalation clause up to 210 or 215. So again, this is real rudimentary for a lot of you that have been doing business. I see Ricky there. Ricky's probably already asleep. I know, Linda, you've seen all that. So, and Sophie, you've seen it too. So rudimentary for a lot of people, but again, there's a lot of people that are brand new and they don't know what an escalation clause even is. Okay, or some brand new people to real estate don't even know what an appraisal is. So I got to keep it kind of balanced there. And again, always come back and ask the staff. That's what we're here for. I'll probably in about a month, we'll start more rudimentary training. But I want to keep this one flowing so that we get out of here on time. Obviously included items here, washer, dryer, refrigerator, all that stuff. Look at the listing agreement. If the listing agreement says washer, dryer, and refrigerator are included, actually, let me take that back. Washer, dryer, and stove range are included, but not the refrigerator, then don't mark refrigerator on here. Otherwise, you're going to muddy up the waters, and the seller's going to be like, "No, it's my grandmother gave me that refrigerator. I love it. It's my favorite refrigerator. It's coming with me," and that can just kind of cloud up the offer. Okay, where are we on track? Purchase price. So pretty simple. Do your diligence to make sure that your purchase price, your offer price, is accurate. Agency pamphlets. Now this one is, let's go back over to NMLS forms. Here's a good one. So some states require it, other states not as much. Most require some level of agency. You are going to be an agent of someone and you've got an agency, you want to give them information on agency. So this is required in Washington State Law of Real Estate Agency. Just go ahead and get it initialed up here in the corner somewhere so that they've seen it. And then you're basically delivering it. They can read through it, relationship, duties, compensation, all that good stuff. I don't want to get into it all right now because it's just going to take time, but I do implore you to read this pamphlet, okay? And so some states require that agency agreement, others don't. Agency, if you don't know, you have a higher level, a higher fiduciary responsibility to your client with an agency agreement. And if you don't have any agreements in place, if you don't have, let's say, any sort of buyer's agreement, for example, then they're just a customer. And you can make an offer, but you can't really give them a whole bunch of information, and you can't negotiate on their behalf. So it's a fine line, I know, but that's kind of how the states define it. So agency pamphlets, make sure you get those to anyone that is possibly going to be a client. Just get them to them right away. Listing agreements. Excuse me. Listing agreements. Okay, let's go back to here, and we'll do a 1A. So this is for Washington State again, and then I realize that everybody has kind of different listing agreements, but this is real boilerplate, and just make sure again, because it's a contract, that you have certain components to it. And the main components to the listing agreement are: number one, date, your start date. Number two, it's the firm that's doing the listing, not you. It's the firm. And I know, sometimes people are like, well, this is my Aunt Thelma. Well, okay, Aunt Thelma, you are listing with Kelly Wright. So it is the seller or sellers, the firm, the term, okay, and then the property. So again, contract has a start date and an end date, and it has the meat of it all inside and needs signatures. So seller, term, commonly known as usually the address right here, but exhibit A's or seller disclosures. Exhibit A's or property. What am I looking for? Yeah, the property description can go in here as well. Brain fart right there. Okay, so city, county, zip, that's all pretty self-explanatory. Seller authorized firm to appoint, and that's where you put your name in here, okay? And then list dates. Again, you have to have that strong date of like, okay, next Thursday, which I like listing on Thursdays because then you take advantage of the weekend coming up. And then the commission. Now the commission is a total commission. Remember, we're getting that traditionally 6%. And then we're offering 3% to the selling office. So a lot of people get confused here, especially the first few that they do. They're like, because they'll go in and say, well, my commission is 3%, Mr. Seller. And Mr. Seller's going, hey, great, 3%, that's great. I was expecting more, but yeah, I'll pay 3%. And then guess what? You get to the close and you're like, oh, it's 6%, my portion's 3%, and you guys can see the contention that can happen. And ultimately, if we went to court and it said 3% on this, then 3% is going to be it, and you'd probably get nothing. If you advertised in the MLS that you were offering 3% to the selling office, the SOC, selling office commission. So just be careful of that. The total commission is 6, and you're offering 3. Okay? So yeah, 6% there, 3% there, and hot diggity, we are rocking and rolling. I don't know, I got like 50s rock and roll on my mind, I think, today. So yeah, and then signatures, okay? Signatures, broker, you are the broker, and then the real estate firm here. So I don't need to sign this. You guys can sign this, and then you've got the license, the right to do a listing for them, okay? Oh, I see chats. Barbara, earnest money. Oh, we're going to get to earnest money. Don't you worry, Barbara. People use password protection on the PDF. I'm not sure that I'm understanding this, Barbara. Let me read through it. Earnest money. What is the typical transaction process for transferring a copy of the check, fax or PDF or email, asking for security reasons as hackers hit email accounts? Is virus software enough to do people use password protection on the PDF? Okay, let me see if I can answer that when we get to the earnest money. Okay, so this is the exclusive listing agreement. Ta-da! And buyer agreements. I'm going to make a note on this, and then we do have earnest money as a separate part of this, Barbara. So, but where? Oh, I don't want that. Definitely don't want you guys seeing my emails. Um, buyer agreement. Okay, here's what I want. The buyer agreement. Now, this is a goofy thing. A buyer agreement. It's mostly for the buyer and to give them a sense of connection and agency with you. It's a really, really weak document. And I've been to court over these enough, and I've been to the realtor court, I've been to regular court. I've seen how this plays out, and effectively judges and realtor court peer judges think nothing of a buyer's agency agreement. And I don't know that they're in here. Let me see if I can find one here. Buy your a buyer's agency agreement. There it is. Okay. Okay, so like anything else, it's got a date to it. It's between two people and a firm, and it's signed. Firm appoints Joseph Kelly to be the agent here. What it's doing is basically saying, okay, you agree to work with me, but ultimately, if they decide they don't want to work with you, and this is what we saw in court on this, if they decide they don't want to work with you, they really don't even have to give you notice. They can just start working with someone else because ultimately, when they get to court, they can bring in a declaration that says, okay, I just wanted to work with this person and I gave them constructive notice. I gave them a call and said, you're fired. And it's really hard to disprove that. So we had a buyer's agency agreement in this one case, and it was rock solid. We had all our paperwork in order, and ultimately the court ruled against us because the buyer's agency agreement meant nothing, and the other party brought in the person. He said he was confused, he was on medication, didn't know what he was signing, a lot of kind of nonsense. But ultimately, the court looked at their buyer's agency agreement and ours and took the word of the client, and we were out a commission. Okay, so we don't want to be out commissions. So just remember that with a buyer's agency agreement, you're just putting a little bit of pressure on them saying, we're working together, Mr. Buyer, and I will show you houses. And if you see any houses, you contact me. If you go to any open houses, you contact me. I will do all the communication with other agents. Don't talk to them other than courtesies, hello, goodbye, thank you. And because we don't want to compromise our negotiating position. And just leave it at that. Be very, very clear about that. I tell people, look, I make my living on this commission. I could drive you around for 100 hours, and some of us that have been in the industry have done this, and then you decide not to buy with me, and I'm out all that. I make no money. I wasted all that fuel, all that time. So make it very clear to them that you get paid at the end of this transaction and only at the end of a successful transaction. So it's very, very important to do that. And the buyer's agency agreement allows you to kind of add that twinge of pain. But between you, me, and these lights that are getting kind of hot, the buyer's agency agreement really doesn't mean a whole lot. Okay, but don't tell them that. I know Keller Williams and some other firms are like, oh, get this, and it means everything, and it's nonsense because I actually went to court with Keller Williams over this buyer's agency agreement. So we saw kind of how it's going to play out. Okay. Let's get rid of that. Pretty self-explanatory there. Again, if you're newer, make sure you print out each of these forms. You know, I had them in a binder, 3-ring binder when I started 20-something years ago, and I just read them over, just like a book, just like, okay, this is what this means. Now, do remember that this stuff changes all the time. There's a law firm like Northwest MLS Forms. I think Perkins Coie is the caretaker of those forms, and they've been doing them for 100 years. So they make changes every year. Legislature makes changes, they make changes. Just be aware of those changes. We'll try to convey those to you guys in whatever state you're in as often as we can. Okay. So any questions on, actually, you know what, let me go back. I'm going to go back to the purchase and sale agreement just to make sure it's complete. Okay. Where is that sucker? Express Forms Home. Here we go. Form 21. Okay. Here is the purchase and sale agreement. So we're going through that. Earnest money I'm going to address separately. Default, forfeiture of earnest money, seller's election of remedies. Almost always check forfeiture of earnest money. Okay. Title insurance company, I would be careful on this one. Having dealt with so many title companies, they're all kind of the same to me. And I know you guys have relationships with individual title companies and you either want them to get the business or you just like them. That's fine. But be careful about when you get into a transaction, especially if you're making an offer, it's a white hot market. They've listed that they pulled preliminary title with one company and they want you to work with one company, but you want to work with your own company. Be careful about forcing that, because if you force that on the seller, if all things are equal and they've got 4, 5, 6 offers, they're probably not going to choose yours because they want to go with what they're comfortable with. So as a precaution in a hot seller's market, just choose the title company that they've already pulled the title report from. Okay, and that's the same with closing agents. So if they want, Sally at XYZ Escrow, it's like, what, fine, use Sally. I usually call them up, say, hey, Sally, this is Joe. I've got this transaction. It looks like we're going to be going forward. Can I get you anything? Do you have any questions for me? So you're basically just introducing yourself to this new closing agent. And they're typically nice and professional. They have to be licensed. There's all sorts of training they do. So I've really never had a big problem with going with someone I've never worked with before. As long as you communicate with them, you should be fine. This case, like anything in life. Closing date, obviously a closing date. This one, just be careful that you don't close on a Friday. I see this way too often, Friday or end of the month. Remember, end of the month, title companies are crunching all their numbers, and most companies are as well. And then on Fridays, a lot of different county courthouses, which is where the assessor is, okay? So in order for a deal to close, it has to be recorded at county. They get off early. A lot of times they'll get off at noon or 2 o'clock or something like that. And so this is a physical piece of paper being couriered over there for recording for a stamp. And if the courier's going at 3 o'clock and they close at 2 o'clock, you're out of luck. And it's Friday. So a lot of times these buyers are like, sweet, we're moving. I've got the van loaded. I've got the truck loaded. We're going to show up in an hour and start unloading Friday night. And that's not going to happen if it doesn't record. So just be very careful about closing dates on a Friday or closing dates at the end of the month, because they could be so overwhelmed they don't get to your document and you have to wait till Monday. Okay. Closing agent for payment of utilities. Yeah, 22K form. You usually just want to make sure that the escrow officer knows that all the utilities have to be paid up to close, and the buyer is going to take over afterwards. It's a common sense thing. The reason this form is here, this Northwest MLS 22K, is because there's a lot of PUDs and there's a lot of different little utility companies out there, and sometimes it's confusing as to which one it is. And so this helps the escrow officer go to XYZ PUD out in the middle of nowhere and go, hey, we got to close this. Is there anything owed on this? Oh, yeah, there's $300 owed in back utility bills. Okay, let's add that to our settlement sheet and let's make the seller pay that. Charges and assessments levied before but due after closing. That's assumed by the buyer almost all the time. A lot of people think, well, if it was assessed before, why should the buyer have to pay that? Because the buyer's enjoying it. The buyer is the one that's going to enjoy the assessment. If the assessment, whether it's a roofing assessment on an HOA does, or if it's a sewer assessment, most likely it's going to be a sewer assessment connecting to the new sewer line. So if it's a kind of a suburb that was on a septic system and now there's sewer in the street, they typically give them a few years to connect. Well, the new buyer is going to enjoy that sewer line for the rest of the time they own that house. And so they're the ones that should have to pay it because it was out of control of the seller. Okay, so call me if you have questions on that, but it's pretty self-explanatory. I realize that buyers negotiate everything and complain about everything, and like I'm not going to pay that, but it's like, guess what? Number one, the deal's not going to happen, and number two, you're the one that's going to enjoy the new sewer line and that security it provides without having to pay for a new septic system, all the septic maintenance, all of that stuff. So, and then the addendums you can just kind of list here. Some do and some don't. Lazy ones don't. Most real estate agents are lazy. So most of the time when I see these, there's nothing there. I'm looking over at Angela because she is the one that reviews these. Want to say hi, Angela? You do? Okay. Anyway, she's the one that reviews your paperwork ultimately before commissions are cut. Okay, then obviously buyer's signature or signatures. This stuff might as well fill out, selling firm, your information, all that contact information so that they have it if they have questions. Okay, selling firm DOL license number. You guys can look this up on the DOL website. It's amazing how many questions I get every day really about what's our DOL number. It's like, well, number one, what state are you in? What DOL number are you looking for? Because we have a bunch. We've got all sorts of different companies in all sorts of different states. And so you can just look it up at your Department of Licensing website in the state you're in, and bingo, you got that number. So that's all we're going to do, is either go get it out of the master drawer or look it up on the DOL website. You guys can do that. Same with your office number. You can look that up in the MLS. Your MLS lag number, you can look that up. Broker DOL and selling firm DOL, all really easy stuff to look up online. I'll let you guys read through the purchase and sale, and again, make sure you pull the purchase and sale that is in your area and read it thoroughly. I mean, carefully and slowly. 1031, like-kind exchange, closing costs, proration, sale information, all that stuff. And then you have your buyer's initial every page. Okay, when you receive an offer you're going to accept, then the seller initials every page and signs it. Okay, so that's the Northwest MLS purchase and sale agreement. This is the one we use in Washington State. The majority of you are in Washington, so this is why we want to use it. Now, Oregon, Idaho, Alabama, Florida, I've looked at those purchase and sales. They're not a whole lot different. They're just kind of moved around a little bit. Obviously, the dates, the seller, the buyer, the signatures, the purchase price, the earnest money, closing agent, all that stuff is on every purchase and sale agreement. And so just read through it carefully, line by line, and fill it out carefully. And if you have a question, the best way to do it, if you do have a question, you're like, look, I'm filling this out, what do I do here? Is to email it to me and then text me and say, hey, Joe, I've got a quick question. I emailed you a purchase and sale agreement. How do I fill out this section? And then I'll take a look at it and get back to you. And obviously, if I don't get back to you, then be persistent. I do get busy some days. So that's the Northwest purchase and sale. I had two of them up, get rid of those. And let's go back to our agenda. And now I'm going to drink my cold tea because I've been neglecting it very badly. Very good, though. I love that tea. I quit drinking coffee like 6 months ago. Went to the doctor, he did a stethoscope on my heart, and he goes, Joe, you have 3 heartbeats. I said, really? Why? He goes, well, how many cups of coffee have you had today? 3. So I just decided right there and then to quit drinking coffee. Tea's got caffeine in it, but I drink a lot of green tea. Okay, little known facts about Joe Kelly. Condos, multifamily, commercial. Okay, let's grab those here real quickly. Not a whole lot of difference in there. Condos, you just have the condo, the HOA, and the condo number on there when you're doing it. Let me see if I can find it. And yeah, bear with me. I know you guys are much more adept at these forms than I am, most of you anyway. Okay, so you can see it looks pretty much the same here. Declaration recording number. So you have to be careful about the unit number and residential condominium, parking number, storage number. Okay, so that's, you're gonna want to have that in there. This one has, oh, actually the other one has FERPTA in there as well. That's a foreign person. If you do have a foreign person buying or selling land or real estate in Washington, you're gonna have to fill out the FERPTA form. Yeah, let's see what else here is different. Not a whole lot. Oh, resale certificate. Yeah, so a resale certificate with a condo, especially if you're converting from apartments to condos, there's going to be a lot of information you're going to have to get from the HOA. So same as the resale certificate, you're going to have to get those, to get that information from the HOA. And that can be a little bit of a pain because they're typically, anyone that's a secretary or administrator of an HOA is usually a difficult person to work with anyway from a personality perspective. Not saying they're all difficult. Some I'm sure are very, very friendly, but typically they can be difficult and they have no skin in the game. It's not like they really care that much. So you want to get things right away. They're like, oh, I'll get it to you next Thursday. Like, whoa, wait a second. I need that HOA agreement. I need that I need that resale certificate done right away so I don't slow this process up. And so you do have to kind of work with them a little bit, massage them a little bit, be persistent, but that's where you're going to get the resale certificate is from the condo association. Okay, so that's really the difference. You know, so the unit, the resale certificate, and just kind of some information specific to that condo. Now if you do a large commercial property, anything over 4 units, we do have commercial forms here, right here. So it can be commercial and investment PSA. So this is just a commercial purchase sale agreement. Looks similar, again, buyer, seller, reference date, purchase price, earnest money, exhibit A, exhibits, the forms that are included in this, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's not a whole lot different than a regular purchase and sale. It has a little bit of agency disclosure is on this. Buyer defaults, you know, where does the earnest money go? So anyway, you can look that over, but if it's over 4 units, you have to go commercial. That's the point. If it's under 4 units, then it's pretty simple. It's just a regular purchase and sale agreement, and you want to add the units to it. Okay. Oops, forms library. There we go. And then multifamily condos we've done. Actually, let me see if I can search for multifamily. There it is, Form 20. Okay, so you can see it looks the same, except there's a few differences, but not very many. Legal description, dates, buyer, seller, all of that stuff, services for utilities, and so on and so forth, okay? So there's a little bit of title insurance information in here. You do want to go with the parcel. I'm sorry, the property description instead of the parcel or address, because there are units in there. The property description in Washington, in this case, the Exhibit A, is going to have that information in there. That everything on that parcel, if it's, you know, if those 4 units are on that parcel, they're all included in this purchase and sale agreement. So really not a whole lot of difference. I have seen a lot of just regular purchase and sale agreements used for duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. So it's not really a big deal. This just makes it cleaner. Okay, no more questions. Barbara, we still have your question. I'm going to get to it. Let's go back to our agenda here. Ha, look at that. Earnest money's next. Fantastic. Okay, gotta clear my lungs. Sip of water. Earnest money. So if you don't know, earnest money is what we use to basically promise the seller that we are operating in good faith. Okay, so we're saying, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. Yeah, I'm going to offer you $200,000, but I'm going to also put money down to be released to you if I don't perform per the contract. So there's a lot in there. Earnest money, there's a lot of questions about earnest money. Number one, let's talk about how much is enough. When you do earnest money, you have to really be careful. It's a fine line. Obviously, someone that doesn't have a lot of money, they can only put as much down as they can. I mean, if it's a young couple and they've got all their other money saved for whether it's a down payment or other stuff, they might only be able to do $500. Now, do remember that the earnest money is applied to the transaction. So it's applied to closing costs. It can even be applied to the down payment. So it's really just part of the whole transaction. Usual rule of thumb is 1%. So if you're buying a $300,000 house, $3,000 should suffice. But again, if you're in Seattle and you're buying a $700,000 starter home, God help me for even saying that, but a $700,000 starter home, $7,000 is probably not going to be enough. There's someone else out there, and I see a lot of transactions, you guys. I see 3,000 a year now, so I see a lot of transactions, and those hot markets, like a condo in Kirkland down by the water, it's just not 1% is not going to cut it. There's too many people offering 2, 3%, $50,000 in earnest money. So you have to compete with those. So just be careful, but normal rule of thumb in the regular normal markets is 1%. And if they can't do 1%, then it is what it is. But let them know that, hey, typically it's 1%, you're doing less than that, it makes the offer weaker. Are you okay with that? And they know their finances. They'll be like, yeah, it's all I can do, so it is what it is. Sorry for using that metaphor or that cliche twice. I'll try not to again. So 1%. Okay, deposit. So how do you do an earnest money deposit? Oh, let me go back to how much is enough. So 1%, and we'll segue into deposits. So for those of you that aren't familiar with it, you're basically getting a personal check or a cashier's check written out to the title company's name. So if it's Chicago Title, they're doing title and escrow, then it's written out to Chicago Title. We do not hold a trust account. Some companies do, but I would advise moving away from that because they can manipulate the earnest money easier than if it's in a truly neutral party. And that's what escrow means, is a neutral negotiator. Not negotiator, neutral, just a neutral party. If you write it out to XYZ Realty, that broker with XYZ Realty can decide on his own that, let's just release this to our clients. And you don't want that to happen. So you have to be very careful about that. But it's written out to the title company, and then it's deposited with the title company, okay? So when you make the offer, you're going to make the offer with a copy of that check and or a promissory note. A promissory note makes earnest money weaker. It makes the overall offer weaker. So you want to do a check, and they go, okay, valid. And then when it's accepted, the whole offer, then you deposit the earnest money at escrow. You literally just that day, within 24 hours, next business day, drive down to escrow with the actual check, with a copy of the full signed around purchase and sale agreement, and get a receipt. And that's really, really important to get a receipt. The first thing every auditor, and we've been through dozens of audits, the first thing every auditor does is go, where's the earnest money receipt? So when they open up a file, bam, where is that earnest money receipt? That's what they care about, because the contract is about, two parties that can bicker in court and resolve that. The problem with earnest money is that now you, a licensed real estate professional, has handled the public money, and they want to know what you did with it. So there's a higher level of scrutiny over that earnest money. Just be aware of that. It's really important. So that's why an earnest money receipt, signed and dated and all that good stuff from the escrow company, is critical. Okay, so make sure you get that and send it to us. And of course, Angela she keeps track of the earnest money receipts. Every file has them. So whether it's paperless or you scan it to us or you drop it off to us, we'll make sure it's in the system and you're good to go. Now, let's get to Barbara's question. Process for transferring a copy of the check. Okay, asking but for security reasons as hackers. Well, okay, a copy of the check. Hopefully, I answered that, Barbara. You've got a check, okay, and I typically I'll have the buyer, if they're making an offer, hold on to that check. I'll just make a copy of it and send that with the offer. Once it's accepted, I'll go get that check and then I'll hand deliver it to escrow. Okay, so yes, are you emailing a copy of the check? Yes. I have, I'm at about 12,000 transactions that I've managed so far in my career, and I've never heard of hacking of a checking account because of an earnest money check being sent over. I suppose you could cross out a couple of the numbers on both the routing and the checking number, but you know what? It's so hard to do that because it can make the offer weaker. And I don't like weak offers. I mean, a weaker offer means, especially in a competitive environment, you just might lose out. But I've never heard of a problem there. I mean, if anyone else knows, chime in. But I've never heard of hackers getting a copy of that earnest money check and hacking an account because of it. There are protections. I mean, we get hacked all the time. We get our account compromised, and Chase Bank has never let us down. So, God, last month we had people buying purses in Beijing, and I was like, oh, wait a second, here's $300 purchase in Beijing, China, and they said, oh, don't worry about it, we'll cover it. So I think if someone did hack and get into that account, the bank would probably shut it down and make sure they refund the money that was hacked, shut it down, and establish a new account. Virus software enough to do people. I don't know enough about virus software. I mean, I use Norton 360 on our computers. There are certainly additional security arrangements you can make. It's a new world we live in. It's kind of like, it's kind of like saying your car will never get broken into or your house will never get broken into. I mean, it's out there and it can happen. I've never heard of it happening with an earnest money check being emailed with an offer. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. Again, if anyone else has heard of that, let me know, or even later on, if you do some research and you find something out, go to our workplace, our Facebook workplace, and share the information. You can post it there. Okay, yeah, heightened security concerns. Yeah, it's out there. I mean, it's just, there's no way about it. It's the new digital world. So, whatever security software comes about, I presume hackers will get around that, and then a new level of software. It almost makes you wonder if the security software companies aren't, employing hackers in Russia somewhere, because you add that fear to everybody, and then guess what? You just sold another 2 million copies of the latest, greatest security software. It's very Orwellian, I think. Yikes. Okay. So contingencies. All right, let's get into the contingencies a little bit. Obviously, I don't want to get into all of them. We'll take a look at all these forms. So look at that. All of those are pretty much contingencies, some way, shape, or fashion. There's a lot of them. Yeah, I'm on the 22s right now. So we just keep going and going and going and going. I skipped up to 90 pretty fast, so at least that's good. And then a lot of this is Northwest MLS forms, discipline forms, things like that. There's roughly a dozen contingencies to be aware of. And so you do want to be aware of them. You do want to use them, but let's kind of go over them quickly, at least as quick as I can. As we get into the offer, which is Form 21 in Washington, then we get into contingencies after that. The financing addendum, the financing contingency is probably the most important, that and the inspection contingency. So financing is pretty simple. There's a couple areas in here that are really important. The most important is on page 2, right here, loan cost provisions. If someone puts 3% in there, and this is a $500,000 deal, that's
Yeah.
$15,000 that they're asking the seller to pay, and that's a whole lot of
Yeah.
cabbage. They don't really
Watch
need to
out.
either. If you go through K loans, the closing cost should be for something that big should be around $6,000, depending on taxes. But the financing addendum is effectively saying,
Yeah.
okay, we are going to be
Taxes.
financing this.
Guys,
Yeah.
it's not sick.
Molly, how did you get unmuted? All right, let's mute you all. There we go. Okay, so it's effectively telling the seller that you're going to be financing the property. It'll tell them how much you're going to put down, what kind of financing you're using, and how long that financing addendum is going to be in play. Now, typically, it is in play the entire length of the contract until close. Because remember, up until close, even the day of closing, the underwriter could pull credit again and find out they just bought a monster truck for $80,000, and now their DTI is out of whack, or debt to income is out of whack. So you really want to make sure that the financing contingent is in play all the way through the end of the contract. But there are some ways that it's not. So let me go over that real quickly. Again, it's a contract, so you got to have a date. You have to have the buyer and the seller, pretty easy. Typically, these will auto-populate in Transaction Desk or Form Simplicity or any of the other softwares that are out there with the forms now. Conventional first. We typically don't see purchase seconds anymore, so that really wouldn't apply very much. VA, FHA, USDA, bam. And the buyer shall pay, 20% down. Or they could do 1% down. Actually, here's where you do 3% down if it's a conventional loan. If it was an FHA loan, you would do 3.5% down. If it was a VA loan, you would do 0% down. And that's okay, because then people would understand that it's a VA loan, it's 100% financing, no worries there. And FHA as well is 3.5% down. It actually would probably pose more of a conundrum, and I would start throwing up red flags if it was a VA loan and it had 20% down. I'd be like, well, why are you doing that? So anyway, that is typically how that works. You want to have the percent down, and that tells them you're serious about your financing. The more down, the more serious you are. It shows that you've saved a lot of money and you're less likely to default on this contract. Now, the seller can request loan information anytime, 10 days if not filled in. They can say, hey, how's your loan coming along? Can we get that an additional approval by the loan officer that the underwriting has taken place? When your offer is accepted, make sure your client makes loan application immediately if they haven't already. When the offer is accepted, you really have about 24 hours of just intense work you're doing. You've got to make sure that they've applied for their loan. You've got that earnest money to take care of. You've got inspections to order. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you have to take care of. Now, here's one that's confusing. So, and this is pretty self-explanatory. Going to do 5% down conventional loan, and we're going to ask for 0 closing costs. Because I look at that, especially when I'm presenting an offer to my seller, that's a big one right there to make it a strong offer. But this one right here, right to terminate. The seller has the ability to terminate the transaction, and no, I shouldn't say. Let me rephrase that. They have the ability to terminate the financing addendum. Okay, they can't terminate the transaction. So if they provide a 22AR, a notice that they are going to ask for a waiver of the financing addendum, that's fine. That's within their right to do. And you can go ahead and say, okay, we'll sign that and still finance the transaction. Does that make sense? So you're financing the transaction. You're taking a little bit of a gamble, a little bit of risk. And you're saying, what, we look good. We're through underwriting. The appraisal's good. We're going to get this thing done. We'll go ahead and sign that 22AR, and we're going to still finance all the way to close. So That's okay. The risk is they're going to lose their earnest money. If all of a sudden they do buy a monster truck and their DTI is out of whack, and at the closing table they find out they can't get a loan, well, guess what? The seller's going to get that earnest money because they did not perform per the contract. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to everybody. I've had, just because it's been confusing in the past, people have come to me and they've said, they want to terminate the contract, and it's not terminating the contract, it's just terminating the financing addendum. And you can still move to close, you just have to have a higher level of confidence to do that. Okay, so that's the financing contingency. Let's see which ones are a little more important than others. Optional clauses is this kind of it encompasses a whole bunch of stuff. So square footage, title insurance, make sure the seller cleans the house. We ran into that a couple weeks ago. Seller didn't clean the house. Buyer wanted to sue them. I'm like, really? You guys are going to sue each other over $200? You know, it gets a little goofy sometimes. When you sit in my chair, it gets a lot goofy sometimes. Personal property, utilities, insulation of new construction. This is the biggest one here, homeowners association review period, making sure that you have time to review the HOAs. Okay, so that gives you 10 days there automatically. And then a home warranty in Washington. If you want to add a home warranty, you know, it could be fidelity, and it could be up to $400 on the buy a home warranty. Now this is kind of like a blank addendum with just a few lines. So if you need a blank addendum and you need more space, that's fine. But you can put anything in here like you would a blank addendum. Okay, that's optional clauses. Home inspection. This is not the home inspection contingency. That's the 35. FERPTA, we talked about that. If you have a foreign person buying or selling, they need to fill out this foreign person. Let's see, what is actually the acronym? Remind myself. Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act. Ha! There it is. So any foreign person buying or selling property in the United States, they need to fill out that FERPTA form. It's a federal form. Evidence of funds. If you're gonna do cash deal, evidence of funds is just saying, hey, you know, I typically will cross out the account numbers, their name is on it, their fidelity statement or their Ameriprise statement that says they have $600,000 in there and they're buying a cash deal for $500,000. It's like, okay, that's evidence of funds that you actually can perform per the contract. This negates anyone that's like, yeah, I'll buy your $500,000 house with cash, and they got $2 to their name. For sale by owner. God, I'm sorry. I cannot get this thing out of my lungs and throat. So my apologies to all. Identification of utilities. That was real simple form, basically just saying, okay, sewer district, garbage, electricity, gas. And that's a form for escrow, so that they know who they're contacting to make sure all those bills are paid. Okay. Lease review, if there's a lease involved. Lead-based paint, this is the form, the federal form. If that house is older than 1978, ta-da, you got to have this thing filled out. Now, you know, we're 40 years beyond this, so really nobody has a known, so it's this box and this box, no knowledge of lead-based paint. 99.99% of the time, these boxes are going to be checked. I mean, people just don't have knowledge of lead-based paint because we haven't used it in 40 years. The only time you could really, I could see, I suppose, when you do a remodel and someone, you know, was tearing stuff apart and they did a test sample and said, oh yeah, that's lead-based paint. And, you know, if you've got a house from the 1940s and it was painted, you see there's 5 or 6 different coats of paint through the years, you know, the chances are there probably is some lead-based paint in those first couple coats, but the only way to find out is to have it tested. Well addendum, if you guys are going to do a well. Let's see, obviously this stuff, Island County, Grays Harbor, manufactured home addendum. If it is a manufactured home, include that because it'll show serial number and year. The L&I, Labor and Industries, information for that manufactured home. And the lender, if you're financing a manufactured home, is going to want to see that as well, because they want to determine and make sure that they understand the age of the mobile home. Okay, septic addendum. If there is a septic system, like a well, if there is a well, you want to add that septic. Thurston County, King County, blah, blah, blah. Short sale. Let me open that one up, because it's a little bit tricky. Short sale is when you're selling the property short of what you owe. You owe $200,000. The property is only worth $190,000. You're selling it short of what you owe, and the lender is going to have to agree to that. And they do their diligence. They get a broker price opinion. So you'll hear BPO being thrown around. They might get a couple of those to determine the price before they accept a lower offer. But ultimately, they know if it goes to foreclosure, they lose on average $40,000 more, okay, than they would if they sell it short for the property. And then for your people who are selling it short, the advantage is that the time to recover to finance a house is less than a foreclosure. So they can get their stuff back in order 2 years and do it FHA, 3 to 5 years conventional. Short sale contingency, computation of time, so you can tell when you're starting the computation of time, and offers from other buyers, so on and so forth. But if it's a short sale, you want to include the short sale addendum. Vacant land, if it is vacant land, I guess I didn't mention that before, but real simple. It's going to look like the other ones. It's just vacant land. So it's really just that legal description and parcel number. Okay, we're getting through 22s. Condominium, we already did. There's a condominium resale certificate. If it's condominium, you do want to include that. Condominium new construction conversion, that's a newer form. The earnest money promissory note, I don't suggest promissory notes because it makes it a weaker offer, but you can include this. Real simple form, just saying I promise to pay this amount. Bam, bam, bam. Okay, two big ones I do want to get into. Well, here we got general addendum. So every MLS has a general addendum. It's just a blank addendum. This is where you can type in, seller and buyer as follows: seller to repair upper part of chimney. Did I spell that right? No, God, no. Chimney. I can spell. Duh. Or it could be, you could add in back deck to be replaced, something like that. Whatever the terms are. And there's some goofy stuff I've seen, but you can add it here. It's just a blank addendum. If you need more space, you can add pages to it as well. But there's a bunch of lines here. You should be able to add everything within one blank addendum. Okay, now the inspection addendum, 35. This is actually the inspection contingency. I just got an offer this week, or at least I reviewed one for one of our agents. It didn't have this box checked. If it went to court, I think a judge would probably say, you know what, there is no inspection contingency because this box was not checked. It would be it would be a gray area. Just make sure it's checked, because that does show the inspection contingency as part of it, a part of the transaction. And then if you need, I would always do an additional inspection of the sewer, okay? And that way you've got time to get that scoping done. So regular inspection and then a sewer inspection, especially if it's an older house. If you're in the city and you've got an older house, there's a strong likelihood that they're using those clay tiles that they kind of piece together for 40 feet out to the road, and those fail, and the roots can get into them really easily, and they can collapse, and all sorts of stuff can happen. I've had this happen. My first house I bought in Seattle many years ago. My wife and I, we were so happy. She's pregnant, we're going to nest, we're going to raise our family, and then about 2 weeks after closing, we find those tiles collapsed, and there I am as a young man digging a trench out to the road to try to save money. It was a mess, obviously. But and I never thought about suing the sellers because I didn't do a sewer inspection. If anything, it was my fault for not doing that. Maybe my agent's fault because I didn't even know that one existed. But it's caveat emptor. And some states like Montana are great about this. Caveat emptor means buyer beware. So if you buy something, you have to do all your due diligence again. You have to be aware of what you're buying, and then ultimately these things break down. So if you buy it and then it breaks down, guess what? You're on the hook for it. So a lot of everyone thinks real estate's Nordstrom's, especially younger people that aren't familiar with it. And I don't blame them because there's no real instruction handbook. They think like, what, there's a problem. I'm just going to go back to the old seller and have them fix it. If it's not written down, if there's not a contract in place, no, they're responsible for it. They bought a property, and guess what? Properties fail. That's why they call them money pits. So at the same time, they want to buy a property in a market that's appreciating at 10% a year. So they love to have that appreciation on their investment, but they don't want anyone to pay for it. So it's again, I get those calls where people are just livid and they're mad and they call me, and I've got to resolve those issues. Anyway, so this is the inspection contingency. And there's a neighborhood review contingency, pre-inspection. Again, Seattle, once I bought a house or helped a client buy a house in Ballard, and we went back at night, and it was right by Ballard High School, and the floodlights were on. And the floodlights just came pouring in from the fields to the back of this house. And they're like, whoa, wait a second. I don't want to buy this house. I'm going to get Friday night lights all the time. So that was a problem. A neighborhood review contingency would alleviate that problem. And then pre-inspections. We get a lot of that in Seattle. If it's a really, really hot market and they expect 10 offers, you don't have time to do an inspection. So a lot of times a pre-inspection will be conducted. And then you can examine that inspection before you make your offer. And then, of course, a waiver of inspection. If they are going to waive the inspection, if they're a contractor or they're just a weekend warrior that thinks they can do a better job than the inspector, they don't care, they're going to gut the house, still get this signed. Get that waiver of inspection signed because, again, dealing with so many transactions, I have had so many people threaten to sue us over this, saying, oh, you know what, they didn't advise. Actually, we've had a lawsuit over this. We've had one that we've had to deal with. And it had to do with the waiver of inspection. And they claimed that our agent should have advised them better to waive the inspection or not waive the inspection. When they knew we won this lawsuit, as we won all of them. We won it because they knew they were going to gut the house. And once they gutted the house, they saw that it needed more work than they thought, and they wanted to blame someone. So they sued us. Joy. Oh, joy. So anyway, waiver of inspection, if you are going to have them or they are going to waive that inspection. And then, let's see. Oh, yeah, escalation addendum. So the escalation addendum, and again, if you're not familiar with escalations, this is basically saying, it's pretty simple, saying I will go up to X price, to a top price in X increments, okay? So the purchase price, the asking price, the offer price is $300,000. There's going to be multiple offers. Your clients are willing to go up to $350,000 in $1,000 increments. Don't get cute with those increments, especially in a hot market. If you're like, oh, we'll go up $100 increments. Well, guess what? I would advise my client to just take the lesser offer by $100 just on principal alone. $1,000. Make sure those increments are healthy because it does hurt. $1,000 more, that's real money. So don't get cute with the increments. Purchase price shall be increased to, let's say, $350. Oh, I'm sorry, in 1,000. This is where it would be $1,000 increments, not to exceed $350,000. All right. And then if the offer is accepted, you fill all this stuff in: competing offer, less credits, competing offer, net purchase price, plus escalation, $350, any other credits, and here's the net new price. So you fill that in after it's been accepted. Okay, any questions on escalation addendums? because you're going to have to use them in Seattle. You're going to have to use them in Boise, Tri-Cities. We're starting to see a few of those a little bit more. Portland, certainly, there's some escalation addendums there in the hot neighborhoods. So yeah, it's just something that is a part of real estate life now. Now, also part of real estate life is the low appraisal. Which form is this? Let's go up here. Appraisal 22A. I don't know why I missed that. Must be lack of T. Haha, solution. Okay, so a notice of low appraisal. This sucker is, boy, I didn't really see this much until the last 18 months or so. But now it's pretty standard. And the reason is that you get into these hot markets, you get into those escalations. You got 5 offers, 300,000 was the asking price. You've escalated to $350,000, okay? But the appraisal comes in at 320. You're like, oh, 320. Now, if you're a buyer, you're kind of hoping that the seller's like, all right, 320, I'll take that. But not necessarily, because notice of low appraisal, you can actually use, you can, like right here, you can do consent to reduction in purchase price. Okay. The seller doesn't really want to do that because they want their 350. And then you can do a reconsideration of value. I wouldn't do it because I've seen 0 come back different. If anything, the appraiser might come back and say, well, all right, I'll give you $200 more value. So it's a real waste of time because appraisers, remember, they're not beholden to anybody. They simply are operating out there. It's not like we can go, you do really bad appraisals, I'm not going to use you in the future. They don't care because the Dodd-Frank bill has eliminated any connection to real estate agents or mortgage loan officers. So they just don't change their appraisals. Proposal to reduce purchase price. They typically don't want to do that. And then notice of rejection of low appraisal and termination. Okay, so typically the seller's they're going to reject that, put it back on the market, and try to get someone to pay cash. Now, when they pay cash, what we're seeing with a lot of really strong offers in Seattle is they're saying they'll pay up to $50,000 if the appraisal comes in low. So they're still financing 300, or let's say in this case 320, and they'll pay cash the other $30,000 directly to the seller. So that's one way to do it, is pay cash. Remember, 20% down is not the only way to avoid mortgage insurance. So if they're thinking 20% down on a $300,000 purchase, well, that's $60,000. Well, guess what? You can put $30,000 down and still buy out the mortgage insurance for like a quarter point to the interest rate. And now you've got that $30,000 to give to the seller for the low appraisal. So you still get the house, you still get financing, you still don't have mortgage insurance, and if you come with K loans, you still have an interest rate that's lower than the big banks anyway. So there's a lot of advantages to it. It gets complicated. Again, let me know. I see so many of these scenarios that I can walk you through it pretty quickly. Okay, boy, we are going through these suckers fast. Where we're 35, inspection, escalation, feasibility, if it's feasible to build on a lot, if it's feasible to do an addition to the house, if it's feasible to do a duplex, take a house and turn it into 2 units, that's where you would do that. And it gives you time, so the feasibility contingency gives you time to go to the county planner's department and go, hey, can I do an addition on this house? Is there anything limiting me? And they might say, well, the process is going to cost you $10,000, and we're not going to allow it typically. And that's where you'd go back to the seller and go, I did my feasibility, it's not going to work. We are rescinding our offer. Counter offer addendum for the sellers if they want to counter offer. Withdrawal of offer or counteroffer, you can do that. We've gone through the buyer's agency agreement. Selling firm's commission. Sometimes this is a good one if you have a FSBO, a for sale by owner. So if they're like, I wasn't going to pay a commission, but then you bring a buyer and hey, this buyer, it wants to buy your house, but I also want to get a commission out of this. Then the seller goes, okay, I didn't want to pay 6%, but I'm okay paying 3% or 2%. That's where you would use this form to say, okay, you're going to pay me 2% on this transaction. Agency disclosure, this is a good one to include just to clarify agency. Undersigned, I am working for I guess there's a little pull down, seller, and buyer, neither seller nor buyer. Okay, but if you're doing dual agency, use something like this. Even a blank addendum saying, I am working as dual agent for seller and buyer. Okay, this form doesn't really matter too much if it's the seller or the buyer, but if it's dual agency and you're working for both, get something in writing that they acknowledge that they know you're representing both parties. The states get sticky with that. Pet addendums, lease, rental agreements, you can read through those ones at your leisure. So yeah, I don't want to get into those. And then there's some discipline stuff here. Notice of rescission. I guess rescission agreement that's an important one. So you can rescind based on a lot of different factors. So we've got a whole bunch here. Termination, failure to pay earnest money, failure to close notice of termination, failure, well, I guess they're keeping the money there, or earnest money remedies. Buyer notice of waiver of financing contingency. We had talked about that. That's where the buyer would say, you know what, we want to keep the transaction going, but we're going to waive the financing contingency. We're still going to finance it, but if we don't close on time, we risk losing our earnest money. And so on and so forth. So a lot of feasibilities, and if the contract fails up here in these forms, those are the ones you use. And then again, disciplinary stuff. Adding people, Northwest MLS forms that we deal with, discipline responses, interpleader. If you don't know what the interpleader process is, that's when it gets so contentious about earnest money that it needs to go to court. Then we basically file an interpleader form giving everyone notice that we're going to district court to determine who gets this earnest money. All right. So when people say, I'm not going to release the earnest money, I want the earnest money, you want the earnest money. When they get all contentious up front, and again, I hear this every day, it's like, okay, well, guess what happens now? Oh, what? We don't know. It goes through the interpleader process, then it goes to district court. All the earnest money is used for court costs, and then whomever prevails is probably going to get their money, the earnest money, attorney fees, court costs, all of that. So a knucklehead buyer or seller that's just being obstinate, they are not going to win in court. And we have to convey that as professionals that, hey, if you want to be obstinate, if you want to battle over this, it ultimately will end up in court. So you want them to be aware of that. And there's a good chance if they're both kind of knuckleheads, because remember, judges hate it when their courts get clogged with knucklehead motions. Knucklehead is a very technical term, by the way. I have a lot of teenage boys, so it's used a lot in my house. If they're being knuckleheads and they just want to fight just to fight, the judge is going to see that. And what he'll probably do or she'll do is they're going to say, well, you know what? You came to my court, you clogged up my docket, and you're both wrong. So guess what? You both lose. We're going to take the earnest money, apply it to court costs. See you later, everybody. So that can happen too. Remember, once you get into a courtroom, it's the judge's courtroom. It's the laws are very gray sometimes and are to be interpreted by those judges, and they have emotions. So you got to be careful. Okay, we've gone through all these forms. Any questions on those? Oh, look, there I am. Okay, let's go back to our agenda. Seller disclosure, lead-based paint. We went through the lead-based paint one. Let me go through the seller disclosure here real quickly. Form 17 in Washington. Very simple. This is something that every state in the union has a form like this, and they have to fill it out typically before they list the property. So during the listing agreement meeting you have them fill this out as well. Seller is or is not occupying the property, and then just the questions. Do you have legal authority to sell the property? Yes. Is title to the property subject to any of the following? Right of first refusal? No. Option? No. Lease agreement? No. And so on and so forth. Oops. I can't, apparently I can't hit these little squares very well. The NA, don't know and not applicable. I get a lot of people sometimes, they're like, well, I don't know. I go, well, you just answered the question. Don't know. So it's okay to mark don't know if they truly don't know. Now, if the question in here where, has it ever flooded? And they go, don't know. So I've had some really goofy sellers in the past just do don't know, don't know, don't know, don't know, don't know. Well, again, guess what? If that gets in front of a judge is going to see through that and go, look, you're being a bad person. You're being a knucklehead. And we have proof here from the insurance company that a flood occurred 2 years ago and you had it cleaned up and mitigated. So we know that you're lying here, and guess what? You lose, we rule against you, pay court costs and attorney fees. And I think in Washington, I think 3 times the damage. They can, but typically they wouldn't in something like this. Anyway, so if they truly don't know, has the basement ever flooded? Well, we've lived here 4 years and it's never flooded. I don't know what's happened before that. Then they can answer no, that it hasn't flooded in the time that they have been in the house. Okay. So they just have to read this through, and I typically will go through it with my clients and read them off. I mean, I know it takes an extra 45 minutes, but it's something that has to be done, and they feel comfortable with me there answering their questions. And so then they do all these environmental, all this, yes, no, don't know. They initial every page, and then they sign it at the end. Okay, and then they can do a description down here if they said yes. Oh yes, it flooded in 2009. We had a pool. I feel like a farmer's commercial. I've seen all this. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. That is my motto now, because I've seen this stuff happen where a pool flooded, it cracked, came into the basement, flooded the basement. There was an insurance claim on it, and they claimed that they didn't know anything about a flood. Well, guess what? They got nailed for that. But if they want to explain, yeah, there was a pool crack. We had it mitigated by X company. They resurfaced, they reconcreted, they resealed, whatever they did. And then they can explain it there. And then they sign. Now here is where the buyer's acknowledgement, that's where they want to sign. We acknowledge that we've read it, but we're not going to give up our rights. Now here, if they sign down here, then guess what? They are waiving their rights. So you don't want them to sign down here, you want them to sign up on top. They sign there, the seller's already initialed all this stuff, and it should be uploaded with the listing. So that's the seller disclosure form. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. Let's see, where am I? Okay, timelines. So checking the chat room, making sure no more questions. Alex, thanks for taking care of everyone. You're a rock star. Okay, timelines, 5 days or less. when you're given a timeline and it says 5 days or less, you have 3 days to get something done. Okay, that means that you do not include the weekend. So if it's a Friday and they say you have 3 days and you completed it on Tuesday the next week, you're fine. Okay, because Saturday and Sunday don't count. Now, national holidays don't count either, but be careful. So you check your national holidays. I don't even know if I can keep track of what they are now. So I guess Memorial Day, Labor Day, Christmas, Thanksgiving, New Year's Day, and I don't know, 4th of July, something like that. Everything else, all these other holidays that banks take off and whatever else they're going to be, those ones do count. So now if it's more than 5 days, okay, then the weekends do count. So if it's 7 days on Friday, well, guess what? 7 days is next Friday. So it's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So if that's the case, if it's 5 days or more, it does include those weekends. Okay. Enough time for finance. This is this is a tough one because you want to get the deal done as soon as possible, but you have to always pay attention to the loan officer. Pay attention to the financing because it could be a VA loan. Let's say for example, it's a VA loan in Multnomah County. And the VA appraisers, there aren't very many of them. It could take a month just to get the appraisal done. So if you say, okay, we want to close in a month, well, guess what? It's taking a month just for the appraisal, and then you got a week after that. If they don't find anything, if they find something, peeling paint or cracked window or some sort of issue with the VA appraisal, then it's going to take another couple weeks because you got to fix that stuff, and then you got to get to underwriting, closing, and get the docs drawn and all that good stuff. So be very careful about timelines. If it's a conforming loan, typically you can close it in 30 days. Same with FHA, depending on that appraisal. So you guys have to judge a little bit. You have an FHA appraisal. There's more FHA appraisers out there, so they can happen a little bit faster than VA, but they can still call out the same stuff. And they can call out, peeling paint and all of a sudden you're like, well, it's a snowstorm. We can't paint right now. Then you've got to come up with a solution. It could be, I don't think the FHA financing would go through. Sometimes when it's the winter time or it's really nasty and you do have peeling paint, you can just use Kills and just get the peeling paint out of there and get one coat, even if it's not dried, one coat that sealed it in. And then they can wait until the springtime when it's warmer and take care of the job properly. But that kind of stuff has to be done, and it can delay financing. So be in cahoots. I don't know where I got that word. Be in cahoots with your loan officer. Your loan officer is really the person that is going to give you some direction as you go through that timeline of, okay, we're going to close this sucker. We want to close it in 30 days, but it might not be feasible. It might not just be a reality. So be very careful. Like I said earlier, don't close on a Friday unless if you can avoid it, great. If you can't avoid it, I was going to say it is what it is, but I wouldn't say that because I know Alex is watching and he'd get mad at me. It simply is. So if you're closing on a Friday and there's no way around it and you can't either get it to the next week or on Thursday, then just deal with it. And hopefully everything is planned out well and it does fund and record on Friday and they can get their keys and they can move in over the weekend. But be very careful about timelines. If you're in a rural area and it's going to be hard to find comps, you don't want 30 days, you want 45 days. And you can also do 45 days or less. So throw that or less in there, and then you can close it earlier without having to do extensions or any sort of other agreements. Okay, questions on that? Alex, stop laughing. Cash transactions. Whew. Yeah, those are becoming more prevalent. Just because, again, it's a hyper competitive marketplace right now. So, and there's a lot of money coming in from other countries. It could be someone from California or even Seattle moving over here to Spokane or North Idaho, where they can sell their little bungalow for $1 million and buy the same bungalow over here for $300,000. Then they got $700,000 and so on and so forth. So buying for cash is fine. Typically, you're going to close a cash deal in between a week to 2 weeks. Okay, proof of funds is going to be key. Making sure escrow has those funds. The thing you want to do immediately, you can close it in less than a week. Your buyer just has to wire the money, the $300,000 to escrow, so it's in there and it's ready to go. And then there's just some paperwork that has to be drawn up. So you can close it in a week or less. I would say no less than 4 days. Typically, it's about a week to be comfortable. And so just kind of gauge it there. But if there's additional requirements or some sort of issue that might come up, they might want to do an inspection. And so they'll do a cash close, but they want to inspect it first. Well, that might be a week out, something like that. So a week to 2 weeks is about normal for a cash transaction. Oh, got ahead of myself. So escalation clause, we talked about that. And appraisal less than purchase price, we talked about that. I'll have to kind of move these around a little bit. Delivering to Kelly Wright. So again, you want to deliver a clean file to Kelly Wright. And I'll say, per the laws of every state in the union, Kelly Wright has to be on your signatures, your Facebook, your advertising, your website. There are some people out there that, are like Joe's Real Estate Company, and they don't put Kelly Wright on there. Well, that's a violation. And guess what? They will find it. They'll come after us. You'd be surprised at the systems that the states have to monitor this. They will catch you. So just be aware of that. And then ultimately they come after me. So I'm begging you, please put Kelly Wright on everything. You can have Joe's Realty Group, but also of Kelly Wright Real Estate. Now, delivery to us is pretty simple. We make it so easy. At least I think we do. And let me know if I'm wrong on this, but we have paperless pipeline. Everybody can get set up on paperless pipeline and submit their paperwork through that. You can just scan it and send it to me, Angela, any of us. I mean, obviously a scanned email and PDFs, it's just boom. I just shoot it off to Angela. She puts it in paperless pipeline and it's ready to go for close. So make sure that you get it to us. And even those of you that want to just bring in your old school, you've got a paper file, you want to bring that in, that's fine too. We do have those. We'll scan it and get it in the system. So we've got a lot of support people to help you, but you have to get it to us. And that makes it a clean close. That way when the check and the HUD, the settlement sheet comes in, then we know that we've got a clean file. We've got that earnest money receipt. We've got the full purchase and sale with all the addendums all signed and dated and or initialed. And then we get the settlement sheet and the check. And bam, we've got a complete file. Okay, so just make sure you get it to us. Some states require it right away. I think being in the habit of getting it to us right away immediately is a good thing. The states, when they audit, they look at closed files. So if it's not closed, then it's really not that big a deal. But I think getting in the habit of doing stuff sooner rather than later is a positive habit. Okay, and paperless pipeline, really easy. Paperless pipeline, we just have to go off an email. If you've had paperless pipeline in the past and you have a previous email attached to that, we'll have to create a new one. So whether it's a new Gmail or a Kelly Wright extension, we can set you up. But real simple, if you're scanning, you might as well just scan it right into paperless pipeline and load it up that way, and we see everything that's scanned in there real time. Okay. Oh, I'm exhausted. I bet you guys are exhausted. I would be exhausted just listening to me. And I actually had to talk and listen to me. Okay, any final questions at all? No, I'm not seeing anything. Okay, fantastic, guys. I really appreciate it. You're welcome, Larry. This was great. This is a good way to start off the year. It's going to be a fantastic year this year. I'm not just saying that because I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist. And I look at numbers, I look at data, I look at facts, and this year is going to be a really good year. So make sure you start your marketing now. Make sure you are set up with conversion and you've got your CRM going, your drip campaigns, because guess what? The spring's going to be here in a click. And immediately those clients are going to be like, hey, you know what? I'm thinking about listing my house. The weather's good. Prices are good. Who should I list it with? If you start the campaign now, when April rolls around, you're going to be in great shape. So do the legwork while things are a little slower right now to prepare for a fantastic April through December even. Okay, these are the slowest months. January and February are the two slowest months. March picks up quite a bit. And then April, we're basically like greased lightning at that point. All right, thanks everyone. See you next week. And yeah, Larry, I'll have Alex reach out to you and get you set up with conversion. Megan will do the onboarding. So Megan handles the onboarding. Alex, I don't think there's a lot of training. We do have some social media training tomorrow as well, so follow that. But once you get set up, Larry, then just go ahead and play with it. All right. Good. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.